Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to talk about an important minority that profoundly shaped American society, Mexican Americans.
Mr. Green, are we going to be discussing the importance of churros and empanadas today too?
No, me from the past. You're going to have to go to Mexico to learn about that kind of stuff. Manifest destiny was the main cause for westward expansion. Americans felt that God gave them the right to take over most of the lands in North America, but they didn't care who or what was living in this land. This is how the United States came to acquire Texas and California.
Before the southwestern part of America was broken up into 6 states, namely California, Utah, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada, it was technically part of northern Mexico. However, most of these territories lacked major settlements.
Only California and New Mexico had large amounts of Mexicans. California with around 35,000 and New Mexico with about 30,000. When Mexico gained its independence from Spain, they lacked economic resources. So to increase trade and revenue, the Mexican government decided to give a large amount of land to American Moses Austin.
And Moises' son decided to sell off some of the land to Americans until they were around 7,000 Americans.
Mexico, fearing that Americans would overrun their territory, decided to nullify the land contracts of Moses Austin. In addition, the Mexican government banned immigration into Mexico. Jeez, Americans, always making people angry. Why can't you be more like Canadians?
The cause of the Mexican-American War was a combination of the large amounts of Americans living in Texas and the debate over slave labor. Mexican elites called Tejanos and some Americans demanded their independence from Mexico. General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna brought in Mexican troops and killed 197 Americans at the Alamo.
In response to this attack, Texans fought back at the Battle of San Jacinto and forced Mexico to recognize their independence.
At first, Texas declared itself to be the Lone Star Republic, but after a while, it decided it should join the Union.
This would add to the already growing heated topic of slavery. Texas wanted to join as a slave state, but the Union was already divided into slave and free states. And with the addition of Texas, this would just upset the whole balance.
But eventually, Texas would be annexed in March of 1845. President at the time, James K. Polk, wanted to buy California from Mexico, but the Mexicans were unwilling to give up California. So, President Polk did what any good president should do when things don't go his way. Send in military troops to forcibly take what he wants. On January 13th, 1846, he ordered 4,000 men under the command of General Zachary Taylor to march from the Nueces River to the Rio Grande. When the Mexican forces came to meet the Americans, 16 Americans were either wounded or killed. Polk asked Congress to declare war on Mexico and justify this war by stating, "American blood has been shed upon American soil."
Eventually, Winfield Scott would capture Mexico City, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in 1848. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo recognized the annexation of Texas and gave up control of California and other territories in the Southwest. The United States would pay Mexico $15 million in exchange for the land and the people living in these lands. Okay, so fast forward 100 years, and the United States was stuck fighting another war. This time, the fighting was done in Europe. With Americans fighting the Nazis, this left many farms without people to work on them. So in agreement with Mexico in 1942, braceros, or Mexican agricultural workers, were brought across the border to help harvest crops in the West. The braceros played a significant role in the agriculture industry, and despite their enormous contribution to the American economy, they still faced racial discrimination and harassment. So, Mexican Americans weren't only good for picking strawberries and other fruits, but they also contributed in the war by fighting. Even though they faced discrimination in their daily lives, some still decided to fight for America, hoping to get equality. Out of 14 Texans who received the Congressional Medal of Honor for heroism in the war, 5 were Mexican Americans. Despite their valiant acts, Mexican Americans still weren't seen as equal in the eyes of many white Americans. Let's go to the thought bubble.
So the Zoot Suit riots are another prime example of how Mexican Americans were discriminated in the early 20th century. Like many other minorities at the time, most Mexican Americans lived separately from whites due to economic reasons. The neighborhoods Mexican Americans lived in were called barrios, and these barrios were sort of like a community within a community. They had their own shops, churches, schools, and leaders, but tensions between whites and Mexican Americans were high. Most Mexican Americans at this time were into this fashion trend called the Zoot Suit. A Zoot Suit was a symbol of lawlessness since most of the Mexican American street gangs would wear them. In June of 1943, sailors and Marines stationed at a local military base near Los Angeles went on a violent spree where they attacked anyone wearing a Zoot Suit. Despite the obvious discrimination and injustice faced by the Mexican Americans, the Los Angeles Police Department did nothing to punish the servicemen. Instead, they arrested the victims and threw them into jail. The only positive thing that came out of this event was that the Mexican Americans now had a rallying point to help them fight for their rights. This could be seen as one of the catalysts for the Mexican American civil rights movement.
Thanks, Thought Bubble. Oh, it's time for the mystery document? The rules here are simple. I'm either right or I get it wrong, and I get slapped in the face by me from the past. God, I hate me from the past. Okay, let's see what we got here. The need for radical change is great and urgent, in the cities as well as in the fields. And if you don't succeed, violence will spread. Other movements will try to do it with violence. But in seeking social change, I am positive nonviolence is the way, morally and tactically, especially in our society, where those in power resort to clubs, tear gas, and guns. I have seen nonviolence work many times in many ways. When we organized California's vineyards, for example, it was the growers' violence, their manipulation of the police and the courts that helped win support for our cause. Gosh, Dan, I can't believe you would give me something so easy. California vineyards and nonviolence totally give it away. It's Cesar Chavez autobiography of La Casa. Major activist and leader for the Mexican-American civil rights movement was Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez headed the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee and helped to improve the conditions for Chicano stoop laborers. Much like the fight for African-American civil rights, Cesar realized that the fight for Mexican-American rights was a fight for human rights. The so-called Chicano movement helped address a couple of issues, primarily farm workers' rights. Cesar Chavez's most important attribute was his willingness to suffer for the benefit of his people. In 1968, he fasted for a long period of time to commit to the nonviolent movement and show that Chicano people that they could battle discrimination and get better rights. Chavez participated in the Delano grape strike and boycotted when Filipino-American grape workers had enough of the harsh conditions and poor pay while working under grape growers. This union between two minorities showed how effective Cesar was as a leader. He got Mexican Americans and Filipinos to work side by side. He told the two groups to share the same picket lines, strike kitchens, and union halls. The rise of Mexican American minority was a symbol of how great America was at this time. People were oppressed, could voice their opinions and concerns and fight for what they believed in. And despite beatings, harassment, and discrimination, Mexican Americans were a resilient group who still influence Americans today, like Jennifer Lopez, Jessica Alba, Mark Sanchez, Mario Lopez. What, Stan? Jennifer Lopez is not a Mexican American? She's Puerto Rican. Great. I did not know that. Well, that's all the time we have for the show today. Thanks for watching. Our script supervisor is Paulina T. The show is written by Kyle Ka. Our camera operator is Tiffany Yang. And our editor is Ivory and Doe. As they say in my hometown, strive for the 5, stay classy, America.